Okay, money news. Common disclaimer, we don't need to do this, it's in the blue book, but I always like to do this. Please don't make investment decisions based on something I said. I may have misspoke, so I wouldn't want you to do that. Just as if we talked about a health issue, don't go do that treatment without talking to your doctor. Same type of thing, or legal advice. Well, money news, we talk about consumer choices, entertainment options, personal technology, personal finance and investments, housing and real estate, business, domestic and international, finance, personal investments, and economics. And I try to target it in my presentation to people with all degrees of economic or financial interests or what they would describe as their own personal expertise. It will be going through the spectrum if I do it right. We went through this stuff. My background, you know, through my other classes, but in this one, before I went back into local government, I was in small business for 5 years, made a payroll, paid self-employment taxes, had a staff, actually had enough people to have a full-time a bookkeeper, and that made me very appreciative of people who are entrepreneurs, people in small business. Primary sources, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Economist magazine, a lot of secondary sources. I try to range the spectrum. American Enterprise Institute is a little bit center-right. Brookings Institution is center-left. Try to find a lot of different views to help make presentations. Also listen to a lot of podcasts that are relevant to this class, including one that's not even on this list I was listening to on the way in today, my hour and 15-minute drive in today. Give Me Shelter, done by an LA Times reporter and another reporter from another media source, just on the housing issue, dealing with housing issues in California. Very interesting podcast. 41 minutes talking about what happened in the final days of this legislature on housing matters. Topping the news, we're still in the longest economic expansion. The longest one in the history of America. And economic expansions don't grow old. Something happens. It's not that, you know, what month will end, what day will end. They end for a specific reason, not because you've had an economic expansion, or at least that's what economists say. This expansion, while broad, is not as big on average as other economic expansions have been. But an economic expansion is an economic, beats the heck out of a contraction. What are the big stories other than how the economy is doing and how it trickles down to all of us? Well, one, the world is going through a change in how we do international trade, mostly led by the US. For better or for worse, we'll find out. And going from basically a rule-based economic trade order to more of a historically power-driven economic order. Big countries, wealthy countries dictate the terms to less powerful countries. When you're number one, like America, that may make sense. Unless you have a surging number two and number three and number four ganging up on you. We'll see what happens. Increasing economic inequality. That seems to be accepted by those who are in the upper 1%, that there is lots of economic inequality. An unrelenting California housing affordability crisis. I mean, how many of you have had relatives leave this state for another state or another part of this state less, quote, desirable, at least initially, thought that it might be less desirable because of housing, either the affordability or the availability of housing. We still are going through great, and this is world history, but we are still going through a point of great technological disruptions and business models disruptions to other businesses. And we have a rapid pace of new products, some of which are bewildering, some of which we just don't understand. How many streaming services can there be? There's a Disney Channel, there's an Apple Channel, there's going to be a Peacock Channel for NBC programming. It's just bewildering. Healthcare costs in America, still very high. Pharmaceutical costs, again, still very high. Disproportionately higher to other parts of the world. But also, many of the leading pharmaceuticals are invented in America because we provide such great economic incentives. So once you develop a drug. Student debt, high college costs, pension sustainability, both on the private and public sectors. The green economy, what happens as it is increasingly implemented? Like when China decides they had enough recycled goods from America. How does that back up into America and the close of many recycling drop-off centers? Unintended and intended consequences of regulatory deregulation. And hopefully some fun stuff. Okay, topping the news. The Saudis got hit. Their oil fields, their oil processing fields got hit hard. Matter of fact, one of the largest of their facility was hit, actually prepares the Saudi crude oil for shipment because it makes it less volatile, so it can get on tanker ships and move. Without that facility and those facilities that were hit over the weekend by between 17 and 19 drones and cruise missiles, apparently, increasingly apparent from Iran, increasingly it seems apparent that they came from a region, Iran. 5% of the world's supply immediately cut off, at least for some days. The largest disruption, according to some of the media sources I read, in the history, the recorded history of the world. It's some in the financial press says this is not just a political or military issue. This is an economic issue because you don't want to get into an oil panic. Oil panic that allows the cartel like OPEC to raise prices artificially just because people are panicked. There's apparently it's a 90-day supply of surplus oil still in the world. So one way not to panic about it, particularly if the Saudis bring back, if they claim this morning, maybe 70% within a week of that. But it shows the vulnerability. Saudis spent a lot of money making their facilities terrorist or attack proof. But just like 9/11, someone comes up with a new cruise missile. A cruise missile that is much harder to shoot down than drones, and they land some hits. Just some, Saudi Arabia produces 10% of the world's oil supply. 10 million barrels a day, 100 billion barrels produced in the world. 5.7 million barrels knocked out by attack in production, and 7 million in terms of preparing it for shipment. So remember, one is actually, supply, the other is an intermediary, but you have to go through the intermediary if you want to move it into world markets. The U.S. has become, thanks to the shale oil, and in often cases, the economically unviable, at least in the short term, oil fields,
A lot of people put a lot of money in oil shale extraction, and with not a whole lot of profits so far, but we have become #1 in world oil output. Saudi Arabia is lower, but mainly because of choice. They don't want to flood the world market with oil and have oil prices go down. They're in this for the long term. And in terms of daily capacity, you see that Saudi Arabia is #1 for sure, that they can just increase their supply very quickly, or their production. How the energy markets respond to the attacks, and they tended to be, the gap now is a little bit lower than it was yesterday. A lot of speculation yesterday. I guess the gap, the oil prices went up $10 a barrel, from $60 to about $70 a barrel. Saudi Arabia still is a major player. Remember, if prices go up at the consumer or the industrial level, that becomes a drain on the economy, a personal economy or an industrial economy. Apparently, according to AAA, yesterday gasoline prices, gasoline companies are always faster than the supply, went up 3 cents nationwide in one day. That oil is at least 30 days away from America, that loss of oil. Those oil companies, they're pretty clever, aren't they? We're now in a period of strikes. We got a strike at GM by the auto workers. What did I read? Was it $100 million a day or $1 billion a day that the loss is to the GM bottom line? I think maybe it's $1 billion a day. 100 million, okay. It was one of those, putting an O on it. UAW on strike. Their basic message is GM is making a lot of money, in their view. We were with you when you went for a bailout. We did the political troops to do it. You're now closing factories in the north and moving them to the south in the non-union areas. We don't like you, but let's try to make a deal. That summarizes the union message. How many of you use Kaiser? How about some of the Kaiser unions going out on a 1-week strike in October? They announced yesterday 80,000 Kaiser workers, including optometrists, clinical laboratory scientists, respiratory and x-ray technicians, licensed vocational nurses, certified nursing assistants, surgical technicians, pharmacy technicians, the people that draw blood. How do you pronounce that? Medical assistants, housekeepers, and more. And there's more than that. That's the coalition of Kaiser unions. There's other unions that are not part of the coalition, such as the ones that deal with mental health. 4,000 of those are about to go on strike, or at least have threatened strikes. The good news, the food workers, the grocery workers, the retail clerks, as they used to be called, did not go on strike. The last minute, both sides blinked and they made a deal. So recently we had the monthly jobs report, steady employment growth, still above the level necessary for more people in the economy, more people going into the labor market. That's good news. It certainly seems to be slowing down from the more robust pace we had last year. More people or less employers hiring as much as they did before. But two things are happening now. One, the U.S. Census is hiring a lot of people for the census. I think they hired, 50,000 last month to work on the census, and they'll hire more. And we're getting into the holiday seasons. Target announced alone that they're going to hire 130 seasonal workers. So on an unseasonably adjusted employment record,
or report, it will look like we'll have more. On a seasonally adjusted one, it will look pretty flat because those things will be taken into account. Question?
Do census workers have to be American citizens?
Do census workers have to be American citizens? I don't know, but they probably have to be resident aliens if they're not, which means they pay taxes and what have you. Now, the Wall Street Journal reported in an article, employment related, the other day, that they found a trend, not a gigantic trend, but a trend of people leaving suburban and metropolitan areas and going elsewhere. People who are information economy workers that can take their job with them. That is, they work at home, or they are enabled to work at home, are moving to other parts of America that is less costly or more desirable to live in. For example, one of the big hubs people are headed towards, of all places, is Boise, Idaho. Boise, Idaho. If you pick up your job and move any place in the internet-connected world, where would you go to? A lot of people are going to Boise, Idaho. There also are going to Sacramento and Reno and Eugene and Spokane and Missoula, Montana, and Las Vegas, which is great a couple of months a year, I'm sure. Some long-term trends reported by some of the publications recently on employment. If you look out a decade, what is anticipated to be a long-term employment trend? About a 0.5% employment growth. That will keep it above the population entering into the labor market, so that's good. Keep it stable. And why is that? Because people of our generations are working longer. Sometimes by choice, more often by economic necessity. Greatest growth projected in healthcare, software jobs. Those are fairly good paying. But by total workers, if you analyze, if you break it down in smaller pieces, it's in the lower paid job classification, like home health care aid. The least growth, and even a decline in certain manufacturing areas, is in the manufacturing jobs, primarily because of technology occurring. Okay. California is on the front line for better or for worse, and I'm sure we might have a disagreement, or some will think it's better, some will think it's worse, is the state legislature passed a governor endorsed bill to implement a state Supreme Court decision that changed how California looks at independent contractors. You know, you have people working for you. They can be employees, or you can hire them as independent contractors. For example, a company hires a custodial service. They may have at one time hired the custodians, but they hired the custodial service. My first job was with a custodial service. Actually, my first job was with the employer. My grandfather, who actually got me into the job, was with the custodial service. But in any case, independent contractors, employers are released of a lot of liabilities and a lot of costs. They don't have to worry about pension, they don't have to worry about health, what have you. They don't have to worry about filling in. They hire a service. And we've seen a lot of that. And then you have independent contractors in fields like ride-hailing, Uber, Lyft, for example, in which, are they employees? Are they independent contractors? Last time I used one, the driver had a Uber sticker on his car and a Lyft sticker on his car. And I said, I know I'm with you now on Lyft. When are you Uber? Next call I take if I choose to. Is that an independent contractor? It may be.
Maybe not under the new California law, should it go into effect. The governor will sign it. Apparently, Uber and Lyft and some others in the field have pledged $90 million to take it to voter referendum. Big change. Lots of field, lots of impacts across the employment scene here in California. Yes, Jim?
Mike, one of the consequences I'm concerned about is that this may be the further demise of the local newspaper.
Yes, newspapers have pointed out that they have used for decades independent contractors. For example, I get, funny me, 4 newspapers at home a day. When we go on vacations, we really are worried. But it's all delivered by the same company. Sometimes they miss one paper and not the other paper. They haven't burglared our house. Their employees haven't burglared our house yet. That's how burglars sometimes get, who's away. They find out who has vacation holds on. But the law that was passed and sent to the governor gives the newspaper delivery people a year to kind of work out a deal. Basically suspended implementation on them for a year, with the governor and legislature saying, let's talk more to see if...
Even many news writers are independent contractors.
Many people are independent. This has a major impact in the restructuring of the California economy. And other states are looking at this, New York State, and it's gotten worldwide attention. So we'll see what happens. The Wall Street Journal certainly, you would expect, and did editorialize strongly against it. Newspapers editorialized it strongly against it, as long as it affected them. They say, carve us out, and we'll have a different editorial. Farm workers may be involved, or part of the lots of possible. There was also a lot of carve-outs, professions that got, no, you're not going to be. And lots of people, a lot of lobbyists made a lot of money getting these carve-outs, and they'll continue for future sessions of the legislature. Let's move on. Soon we'll have the 13th round of trade negotiations between the U.S. and China. The vanguard team from China will come to the U.S. Either later this week or early or next week to start the low-level discussions, the technical discussions that lead to higher level discussions. 13 rounds. It alternates between the U.S. and China. This time it will be in Washington, D.C. And we know that both sides are trying to look both like they want to make a deal and that they're not going to lose in a deal. They want to make a deal, but they're not going to lose in a deal. We know from almost all the economic statistics coming out of China, China has been hit hard. Now, probably trade is the reason, but I think they also expanded so quickly that sooner or later there was going to be an adjustment. Private economic reports, you wonder how they get their data in a country like China, even show the the reduction of the growth factor in China is even steeper than the government reports. That's not surprising. Slowing down to 5%. Remember, it's more like us. We're at between 2 and 2.25%, 2.5% GDP growth. So their economy is still growing, but they bet a whole lot of political stability that the economy would continue to grow fast. China put some duties on us. We put tariffs on them. We'll see the president ordered all American businesses out of China, but didn't follow up on the paperwork necessary to implement that provision of an anti-terrorism law. The president delayed the tariffs really affecting consumers until after the holiday season well, it will still be in the holiday season, but by the time they come into effect, it would be too late to get that into the stores. To December 15th, hitting electronics hard, computers, apparel, toys, and plastic and rubber products. Lots of changes affected by these tariffs, both in China and in the U.S. Apparel firms brace for tariffs impacts. We know that why can you buy a shirt at Costco for $18? When you know that it used to cost $40, $50 in the U.S. A lot of our clothing businesses, apparel business, is based upon this Chinese industrial manufacturing economy. But when you look at how the tariffs have come into effect on China goods, 1986 was the previous Gesundheit high point in tariffs before they came into the World Trade Organization. Average tariffs on China went way down to 2 or 3%. Continued that way until this administration, in which the tariffs keep going up and up and up, average tariffs on Chinese goods. If you look at that, again, on other items, oh, by the way, that has to do with the percentage of goods that are subject to tariffs. This has to do with the actual tariff percentage themselves. Okay, let's move from China to something else. Our GDP growth has slowed. Whatever was the stimulus from the tax cut seems to have petered out, or at least that's a general view of economists. But profits by American industry tends to be rolling along quite well still on average. The other day, the Congressional Budget Office issued a report, and it's on our website if you want to drill down and see their thinking, that at least in the midterm and the short term, there is a drag on the economy because of the tariffs imposed on China, with the average impact on American families around $580 a year if they fully go into effect. Now we've seen the stock market go up and down on news of what's happening in China. Goes down, then it slightly goes up, and then it goes up, down, up. May have put in a lot of volatility. And worldwide, when the two largest economies, remember I don't know if it was an African or an Indian saying that when elephants fight, something happens, not good to the rest of the people. Anyone know that saying, when elephants fight, the ground shakes, I guess. Purchasing managers are getting a little bit less optimistic on the nature of the economy. That's what's known as a leading indicator of potential economic problems. Truck makers are slowing down. Trucks are a big profit maker for automobile manufacturers, gigantic, because the profit per truck can be several $1,000s, while profit per passenger vehicle can just be in the hundreds. Even RV companies are slowing down on their production. So these are, again, leading indicators of maybe problems in the economy. But the one thing that could save the economy, which I think everyone wants it to save, and particularly if you're in power, as we've said in other classes, every president claims they're responsible when the economy is good, and every president claims they're not responsible when the economy is bad. But regardless of who's in power, the key correlation is what are consumers doing? Are consumers buying, not savings? Are they buying? Are they buying at the same pace? Are they increasing the pace? Are they confident about the future? Even if they're not confident about the future, are they buying things now? And so far, our economy, unlike, for example, the German economy and the Chinese economy, is very dependent on consumer purchases. We're less dependent on exports. less dependent on exports by far. So we can just draw a moat around, a trade moat around America and probably survive. Our economy would have major hiccups. We would not have as many people employed. Things would cost more. But we could do that. Other countries literally cannot do that without a lot of unrest and economic consequences. So as long as consumers keep buying, this economy should keep rolling along at some level. And there's a lot of data on that. However, part of why it's rolling along has been relatively cheap, not in Southern California, relatively cheap gasoline. That, gasoline takes a lot out of a family budget if it goes up. And it provides some surplus when it goes down to spending habits. Okay, lots of things here. Of course, when we talk about low unemployment, America is a very diverse country, so it depends upon where you live. What's the unemployment rate? California, 4.1, Texas, 3.4, Florida, 3.3, all very good figures. Even in California, our employment rates, or unemployment rate varies significantly. Imperial County, 18%. Lots of differences. Now, one of the factors of how well is the economy producing jobs is how many people report themselves to be underemployed. That is, they would like to work more hours. And you can see the data on there. It's staying fairly stable. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to another topic. How's the stock market going? The Standard & Poor's, a broad index, 5 days up 0.6%, 1 month up 0.254%, 3 months 3.75%, year to date 19%, which would be if you could just invest this year only in the Standard & Poor's, that would be a pretty good year. It would be an outstanding year. However, if you go back 365 days, 1 year, it's 3.78 because what did we learn last year? December was a stinker. December, like the floor broke and the values went way down. So lots of things. Okay, what's happening this week that may affect the economy, and particularly the investment economy? What happens on the Saudi oil facilities? What happens next? How quickly they recover? Are there any other attacks? Do we go to war with Iran? Well, since Saudi Arabia go to war and we just supply them, as Mitt Romney suggested, we shouldn't do the kinetic part of any war. We should just supply the combatants or the side that we favor. Industrial output report comes out today. The chairman of the Federal Reserve goes before Congress on the House one day, today and the Senate on Thursday. Federal Reserve is likely to reduce their benchmark interest rate by 0.25%. On Wednesday, their forecast out of that may be as important as what they actually do. Second update of the fourth quarter GDP report on Wednesday, monthly personal income report on Thursday, and new and existing home sales report on Thursday and Friday. One on new homes and the other on existing nationwide. So all those things can move the markets this week. Okay, let's move to something we can really get our hands around, some consumer news. Hearing aids are getting a lot better, and in many cases, particularly in 2020, then when they'll start becoming over-the-counter, a lot less expensive. Newer hearing aids, this is portrayed over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal, have lots of capabilities in terms of hooking into music, even commanding your home smart appliances, what have you. But here's an odd factor. The audiologists and people in the business, medical professionals say, Only 20% of the people that need and would benefit, let's say 20% of the people that would benefit from having a hearing aid actually have a hearing aid. Only 20%. Now, some of that may be because of cost, but I don't think that's the only driver. I think that's how you perceive yourself. You know, that's not part of your look. But a lot of things are happening in hearing aids, and I see that as a trend that we'll see going forward. Would you be surprised that when you shop on Amazon and you search for something, the Amazon owned house brand, the Amazon house brands tend to come up higher on that search than other brands? Are you surprised by that? Wall Street Journal published an article almost you get a sense that it's a big scandal. But if you own the business. You go into a business and say, I remember when Circuit City was around, which television would I buy? They would take me to the television they were making the most commission off of. So, you know, you check Consumer Reports and other places and you go, hi, do you have this Sony model so-and-so? Oh yeah, but we got this other one. But be careful. Don't be surprised if you shop on Amazon. If that's true, that shows you some of they particularly come up on page 1 of the return on the search engine. And not surprisingly, most people don't go to search 2, then page 2 on the search engines. Here's something that is more challenging, and it's an Amazon issue. Another Wall Street Journal investigation. A lot of goods, or at least a lot of goods in their study, were put on by third-party retailers, sellers, that would not pass U.S. safety standards. And because there was no guarantee that the company that was putting it on wasn't using counterfeit products. You know, you get that Gucci-like purse. Gucci-like purse. How about a toy for your grandchild? This is serious stuff, and the Federal Trade Commission is investing in looking into this. Amazon has such an, apparently according to the reporting, such an open way that third-party resellers can get onto Amazon. There's either little or no vetting to ensure bona fide products, other than the ratings. And there's services worldwide that do nothing more than do these short little reports and post it onto Amazon and other seller sites. But got one, it's great. And they even become, verified purchasers. They buy it, and then they trade it on a third, in a secondary market and put the stuff in to get the ratings up higher. It may have nothing to do with the product quality. How about this victory? The Postal Service overreached when they increased forever stamps 10%. So a federal panel said, nope, you can't do that. The postal system hasn't announced whether or not they're going to appeal that. That was the justification was that it was easier on consumers if it went up a larger amount than a smaller amount. It would be easier on consumers to calculate. I think that's a swing and a miss. How many of you ever go to Ontario Airport? Me? Well, don't expect Uber to take you there because Uber didn't want to pay $1 more to the airport for dropping you off. Lyft so far, it says, is okay. I think Uber is afraid that the Ontario fee, what was it, $3 or $4? Went up $1, would lead to other airports jacking them up. So they better go stay out of a small market, small airport, than have the other airports say, well, if you are willing to pay that, if you want to come to LaGuardia Airport, you're going to have to pay a lot more. So Uber is out of Ontario. How many of you had movie passes? That great service that you could pay a fee, what was it, $9 a month or so, and you get all unlimited movies, and it would use, in effect, a debit card, and as you got close to the box office, it would get activated. You would give them the credit card. They use that credit card to buy the ticket, and then when you left the facility, the debit card would be deactivated electronically until you go to another one. Well, that business model didn't work.
Yeah, I got one as a gift,
Uh-huh.
and I used it, and apparently I was like everybody else. As soon, when they got them, they were going to movies, and they were not making the money they thought. They thought people would maybe use them twice a week.
Yeah.
They were using them like 6-7 times a week.
Yeah, I think the assumption was that the business model, that they would use it maybe twice a month, and that they could use they could steer people to go to other movies and then get marketing fees from those producers to, kind of steer people to it. People were going 5-6 times a month, or several times a week. It was a great deal for the consumer. It just didn't work out business-wise. Goodbye, movie pass. However, the money you saved on your movie pass, you now can spend, or the money you used to save on buying gas out of California, you can now spend on Apple TV, which will be only $5. If you buy a new Apple product, like an iPad or an iPhone this year, it will be included for free for a year. Smart move. It will not be a library of movies like Netflix, but will be new original movies. They want to be the HBO of new TV and movies. We'll see. And selling services is a big thing to the Apple economic model. They think they have hit pretty much a ceiling on how many iPhones and iPads and laptops and desktops. So increasing the services they sell is very important. I know you all listen to Taylor Swift. You all have that in your streaming service. One thing that Taylor Swift was the one that was resisting having her newest albums go on to streaming services that you essentially rent, like a Spotify. You rent the music. And you have this gigantic library of music available to you until you stopped your subscription. And then it deauthorizes you, and the music's gone. Music's gone. Taylor Swift, Taylor as I call her, didn't like that model and pushed back, but she finally gave in and released her newest album on that. Didn't do it. It did well. It topped the charts. It didn't sell as many as she used to sell on downloaded music. Okay, I don't like Spirit Airlines, but I may change my view. Spirit Airline is giving you bigger seats. Wouldn't that be a good thing to do? Spirit Airlines, one of the low-cost airlines that serve parts of the U.S., is broadening their seats for contemporary Americans. They're unlike the airlines, and took the bathrooms and reduced them in half. And someone told me that they had been in one of those airplanes. Oh, here's the thing. Okay, strike that. What they're doing is, let me review my graphic. What they're doing is they're broadening the center seat. The center seat gets bigger. That's kind of clever, isn't it? No one wants to be in the center seat. Yep.
They're also going the opposite direction, where Delta's looking into seats where you're practically vertical.
Yes, yes, seats that have a more vertical pitch to them. And they've already narrowed the size of the seats by using different construction materials. So the seats that used to be like that are more like that now, the backs of the seats. Yes. Okay, let's move on here. Disneyland had a slowing. They spent a lot of money at Disneyland, or as it's called, Disneyland Resort here in Anaheim. And they had a slower summer than they projected, despite putting the new Star Wars stuff in. They started to curtail some of their live entertainment or redistribute it onto the park. Still, Disneyland, according to a Cal State Fullerton Mahalo study, is an economic super engine for northern Orange County and much of Southern California. An $8 billion annual impact. $8 billion impact and secondary impact on the market. Now, usually those figures are somewhat inflated. Not that they don't have an $8 billion impact, but they take a lot of that money from other businesses that would have gotten it if it went to Disneyland. Think of Knott's Berry Farm or Universal Studios. But $8 billion standalone economic impact, that doesn't mean that they make $8 billion. That's how much of their impact in our economy, local economy. Very important. The Supreme Court, throughout legislation, federal legislation that restricted gambling in states. It was the so-called Nevada rule that where you could do sports bets, and states that have run in to allow sports bets are finding people prefer to do it online instead of going to a sports book at a casino or at a horse race track, and by a lot, actually. And states that have implemented have seen a lot of money, which the state gets through their taxation of it, a percentage. These are the states where sports betting is allowed or being considered. The blue states are where sports betting is allowed currently. The lighter blue states are where it's been approved but still to be implemented. And you see California where it's being considered, hasn't been implemented, and states in which it's failed. But sports betting is coming to more and more of the U.S. states, and I think once we ever get to the next recession, whenever we get to it, more states will allow it. That's the way we all seem to always do. We like sins in bad time, when we have the least money to spend on it. But look at the New Jersey example. In June of 2019, 83% of the bets that were legal bets in the state of New Jersey went online. Let's move on. How about some retailers? Any of you go to the Brea Mall? Okay, big changes to the Brea Mall are under consideration by the Brea City Council and the Brea Planning Commission. Adding residential and additional retail to that center. If you look at the where it's going, see if in the yellow, the highlighted areas are the changes. Sears out at 161,000 square feet, and in are the new yellow stuff. Additional mall space at both level 1 and level 2, 432,000 additional mall space. more than offsetting 161,000 loss from the Sears. 312 residential units to be built on that site at 380,000 square feet. Lots of changes, and that's what you're seeing more and more is that we have so much more retail space per capita than most other countries. And California has so much retail space retail space, they call gross leasable space per capita than other parts of America. So there's a surplus of retail space at the time in which online is becoming is surging. So what do you do with that commercial space? Retail is one. Over at the Montclair Mall, which is also going through a major renovation now because of Sears, they're going more of an entertainment venue, including a large live entertainment venue as part of the mall that's under construction now. Some of the mall shops, like Forever 21, I know many of you shop there. Forever 21 is a mall mainstay. I think they either went into bankruptcy or they're about to go into bankruptcy. Probably Chapter 11, in which they can go in and cancel out leases for less profitable stores and keep leases that are profitable. It's the way you use the bankruptcy to restructure your business. Property owners hate that, commercial property owners. You come in, basically it's a way you take a 10-year lease and you extinguish it in bankruptcy, but they're having a major problem. One company that is not having a major retailer is Target. Target, it seems to be back resurging itself. And why is that? Well, new CEO, and they seem to get both parts of the business right, both the brick and mortar and the online. And they seem to be humming, at least as a business. I don't know if you're experienced. Have you seen any betterment or
yeah. I have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
I've gone into Target, I can't tell you how many times, and found the area that I wanted to buy a product from empty.
Oh.
Not there. And it's been a whole range of products. I have never gone into, now that was Walmart. I have never gone into Target and experienced the same thing.
So Target seems to keep their shelves stocked. Well, Walmart will have big holes, big deserts, if you would, in their store. The problem that Target had, and probably helped lead to the ouster of the last CEO before the current CEO, they couldn't get fresh items down right. Fruits and vegetables, they tended to have problems. You find bananas either green or so yellow or almost brown. They're having problems, but they were working on that issue. And sometimes you'd say you can't do everything. You can do this well, but you can do the packaged goods well, but maybe fruits are just a little bit beyond your range. Macy's and J.C. Penney's partners with the largest thrift store. Now, is that a good idea? Now, this is an experiment that these two companies are running. Is they got so much space in some of these big stores, literally, you know, as Macy's likes to call their Manhattan facility, the big store, that they're allowing lessees to come in, and they're trying to think about maybe we have part of the store where you can go in and get formerly owned, what's it called? Gently used clothes that would appeal to their clientele. It may not be bottom of the market, it may be middle of the market. It may be someone, and maybe I'm indicating gender bias now. It may be someone that wore the dress once. I can't imagine wearing the pants once and returning it. But I can think if you have a party dress one time, $200, and didn't spill anything, $500, and you can go in and get part of that back. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe that's a good thing that you don't want to buy a $500 dress. You can buy a $100 dress, but it looks like a $500 dress, and still in style. We'll see. Okay, personal finance. Let's talk about this income disparity issue. Median income continues to be flat. That is, the average, if you took the high earners and the low earners and you went right in the middle, the median, not the average, but the median, right, the 50%, tends to have been very flat over time. And a number of studies are increasingly showing that. By the way, what is the median income in America? A recent Census Bureau study done this year shows that 50% of Americans, families, earn $63,000. That's median. And then you can see that how that goes up and down from that. 95th percentile, 248. That is, that there are only 5%, the top 5%. And the median income hasn't changed much since 1999. Look at those numbers. Those are in real dollars. That is, you take the inflation out of the dollars. Has been pretty flat. Look at the difference between 78 and 99, and it went up a lot. But it's flattened out significantly. And the same thing is holding true on assets. That is, not your income, but what you own. Your house, your car, money in the bank, securities you may hold, have been amazingly flat for many Americans. This chart it shows the differences. And household net worth. Wealth for the bottom 50% of Americans. Net worth is that line. You see it disappeared around 2018 during the recession. Has had a little bit of a growth. Okay, let's move. The average debt from college, the most rapidly occurring debt in America is college debt, student loans. And look at how the average debt has gone up per graduating seniors from a four-year institution. Now up at $29,000 and keeps going up and up and up, according to the study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. If you look at that in terms of purchasing power from those students when they graduate, they have much less purchasing power. So maybe it's not only the fact of housing availability, maybe they just can't afford it, almost regardless of the cost of housing. They got too many other debts. A recent survey showed that the biggest hurdle, however, for students is housing and student loans. So that's a great thing. You get graduated and you have debt. You have one type of debt, and you may have the cost of either rent or, if you ever want to get into ownership housing, a double whammy to our graduating seniors. And nearly 40% of young adult Californians live with their parents. This is ages 18 through 34. So think about your families. Are your families different? Are 40% of your young adults living at home? Yeah. 100% of our young adults are living at home, not with us. That's why your children, grandchildren, your children, very costly. And it varies throughout even LA County and Orange County, but it's still up there in the high 30s and low 40s. They also tend to be more likely to be male than female, more likely to be a person of color than white, more likely to live in an immigrant household than their counterparts. These graduates, if you look at If you look at some social statistics of when you look at the students here at Cal State Fullerton and students at other campuses, think of this. You know, if the cost of college is going up so rapidly in the non-public institutions, or even the public, but not necessarily in California, at least not the tuition costs. But look at the private nonprofits. The number of students applying, or young people applying to the elite universities in America has gone up tenfold in 20 years. The top universities, tenfold. Population hasn't gone up that far, but people are so much trying to get into the top tier. Even the top tier is very expensive. At the same time, the cost of the medium single-family homes continue to go up, and the income among those 25 to 34-year-olds in stable dollars is virtually unchanged since 1980. Look at that. We have a much more educated a group of young people now, but the income is very much different. Here's the average debt, according to one study, by master's program. If you went for a master's program, $30,000 in education, $65,000 in international relations. That's an interesting major. And if you go into a professional degree like medicine, $170,000 in debt compared to an alternative degree in health science. Of course, you won't get the income you would get in a medical degree. Same thing in law. And we're finding that almost 50%, about 40%, 45% of the jobs initially taken by these graduates are in jobs that probably doesn't require a skill set you gain in college. But employers can be selective. So what do when you have a lot of people to apply? You keep raising the standards, get the higher quality people, more that you think you can raise them up later on, promotability. That's kind of sad. Now, what is the cost here in Orange County? Let's a couple of costs. Let's look at costs here. And this is very small. I'm sorry, I'll have to interpret this to you. If you went to UC Irvine, the cost of tuition and fees for the class of 2023, that's admitted right now, in the fall of 2019, 4-year tuition and fees, 4 years of fees. $13,000 versus out-of-state $43,000. 4-year total, $55,000 versus $182,000. Think of the $182 is either the break even or a little bit of profitability. That if we didn't have the subsidies into the U of C system and the investments and donors base there, it would be pretty close to that. What about Cal State Fullerton? Well, if you look at a similar thing, it adds up to $6,000, about $7,000 a year here at Cal State Fullerton. 6922 versus 18,000 if you're in out of state. So still, I think in California, we still have some of the most affordable higher education, public higher education. That's my point really here. But higher education, the investment, is still a lot of money. And so when you hear politicians talking about dealing with tuition, and some say, well, tuition is not the problem. It's the books, it's the housing, it's all the other things. It's not having a job. But tuition certainly is part of it. However, some of us say, so what? To the younger people. Some older Americans say millennial student debt is their own fault. A congressman recently, Georgia congressman, said debt levels were a crisis, but pressed witnesses on whether student loans were absolutely necessary for schooling. In effect, why couldn't you go to a cheaper university? And what are we doing to keep the cost of universities down? As long as we basically allow anyone, almost regardless of credit worthiness, to go anywhere with a loan, aren't we just encouraging higher education to spend more or to charge more? Others say, but it's like the medical profession. This is not a field that productivity really relates to. That no one wants to go and have less education, less hours of education. They want to get the education, but they don't want to, have a teacher, you just change the unit, the metric for a 3-unit class to half the class time, So it's hard to get productivity improvements, and maybe it is virtually. It's very difficult for higher education to lower their fees. I don't know, but it is a problem. Let's talk a little bit about health care to completely depress you. You've heard these statistics before. This is the latest. It was in the LA Times today. Why in America, and I'm sure there's an answer, and I want to hear the answer. If any of you know the answers or have some studies that can send it to me, and we'll talk about it in the next class. Why in America, the cost per capita, they take all spending on healthcare, whether it be public or private, all spending on healthcare. Why in America is it $10,000 per person? Well, in Britain it's $4,000. Is it in Netherlands $5,200? In Germany $5,900? In Japan $4,700? And why in America on some of the more common prescriptive drugs, why is there such a gap between the US and other countries on the cost of that? One of the things the Canadians didn't like was opening up their drug market to America. Some of the legislations being proposed is that would allow Americans to buy Canadian drugs. So what the Canadians fear is that the drug companies will just change the price to Canada. So you can go to Canada, but you're going to get the same price as the USA to get those drugs. I mean, as long as I don't know what the system is now. Probably because we pay doctors more. Maybe we get more doctors. Matter of fact, there's been a gross increase of doctors in America. Not always in the right fields, like primary care, but there's been an increase in doctors in America. Obviously, if you pay more, you're going to attract different people. What was who was it we listened to the other day? This story may be as good as the source, I forgot. But it was a story about someone in Japan that said that they couldn't qualify to become a teacher. So they went with their backup profession and became a doctor. And it may just be how we compensate, but it's a private market compensating. It's, do you want government to decide and never change how much a doctor gets? I don't know.
For-profit insurance companies.
You think, is there that much of a margin in the system? I can think of a 10% change, about almost 100%. Is it because they ration it there? You have to wait 3 months to go in to see your primary care? That could be it.
The last time I looked, the administrative cost of carrying the insurance in the U.S. was a single-digit number or very low for Medicare, but for the private insurance companies, it was around 30%. Just like in colleges, for example, the real cost that's a major aspect of the credit increase in colleges is not education cost per se, but administrative costs.
So administrative costs could be the reason.
And we're the only nation in the world besides South Africa that operates without a federal or national control over the allotment. In fact, in the tariff agreement with Britain that we're working on, there were 3 areas that were off the board. And I don't know whether it was the U.S. or Britain that didn't want it, but national health care was not typically an open system in the trade agreement. Because they were frightened that it would eat away.
Well, let's talk more. Send me some stuff that you have. Yes, one more.
Why is the medication so much less expensive in Canada to begin with?
Well, here's my theory, and let's test it with fact. My theory is that it's a scalable thing. That once you hit, your major cost is developing the product and getting it to a profitable point. Over and above that point, if you can expand the market, it costs you a lot less. For example, the last person to join OLLI has less expense to OLLI than the first person. I mean, we're not going to hire any more staff. We don't have to pay any more parking fees because we pay parking in a gross number that is only based upon how many spaces we have out there and not how many parking permits we have. So, the margin. So I think as they went into other markets, Canada and Europe and Asia, they can profitably go there. Plus, they can lower their price to compete more in the marketplace there. Maybe because the government regulation there only allowed them to reach a certain point and still be profitable. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Usually I don't like to pick on public employees because it's one sector picking on another sector. But this got my attention. A story apparently well reported that some public agencies pay outrageous premiums for their employees. For example, one agency spent over $50,000. The Riverside County Rubidoux Community Services District, the general managers received health benefits costing $57,000. $57,000. So think about that. That's about almost $5,000 a month, $4,800 a month. That's a lot. And I remember when I was doing local government labor negotiations for the employer side, that the argument was always among some employees, the single employees, why do we pay family coverage? And why do we do that? It seems to be a disproportionate. And then we did some surveys and found that some agencies use as their benchmark the high cost family coverage. My thought was, if we do it, wouldn't we want to have a benchmark, the lowest cost family coverage? And if you want to do more than that, you can, Of course, I'm a Kaiser person for almost 30 years now, so I never picked the highest cost plan. But if anything, I think this leads to the public thinking that politicians want to take care of themselves more than their constituents. Oftentimes this is for management people, but still it seems to be so egregious, particularly when health care, for the most part, is tax exempt as a benefit. So you get in health care costs and not in a salary that can be generally taxed. So it just seems to me to be a very sad thing. Okay, let's move on. Check what your agency is doing. Let's start on housing and probably end on housing. I think we're getting close to the end there. Okay. Well, the summer ended okay for the local real estate industry according to the Orange County Register. sales occurred. People wanted to sell before, the end of summer so people could relocate into new school districts or within a school district. Inventory started to move a little bit, but there's still a lot of weakness in the real estate market, both the new homes and existing homes. And in one way that seems to be non-intuitive. Why, when we have an estimated 3.5 million dwelling units shortage in California, isn't there greater demand? And of course, many point out, because they can't afford it. There can be no demand if you don't have money. There's only wishes. There's a wish demand, but not a financial demand. There are some places in America, and even in California, in which the amount of homes, existing homes for sale and how fast they sell, either the velocity or the absorption rate that real estate people will talk about, is pretty good. Up in Contra Costa County, near Silicon Valley, Contra Costa County, Sacramento County is among the top in the nation. Matter of fact, is the top in the nation. Well, Riverside County is also doing well, but nowhere near the Contra Costa County. Rents in Southern California continue to soar nearly twice the inflation rate. We'll talk next time about some of the new legislation dealing with housing costs in California. Some may help, some may hurt. We'll talk about that. In Orange County, and if you're a single earner, that is, you don't have another income in the family, to afford living in the average Orange County home would take 85% of your pay. So, got to live with someone else, not live in Orange County, right? That's kind of simple. But that shows you the problem in housing. More seniors are losing their homes or losing their ability to pay rent and still seeking employment in many cases, or in retirement and being on a fixed income. Okay. We won't end on a high point, but we'll come back next time. Those of you who want to come back, a week from Thursday, I'll do my class on the Trump presidency. I'm sure there will be a lot of news. We may be at a war. We may be not at a. We may be helping the Saudis at a war. Who knows? We'll find out. Maybe a just war. We'll find out. October 1, we'll have the first of this semester. Can they do that? The U.S. Constitution of today's America. And we'll be back with this class in a month on October 15th. And thank you very much.